How do you feel 2 years on? How has it been for Afghanistan? It's a daft question in a way, but try to answer it.
Well, I'm pleased you're covering this, and I speak from a personal perspective. Afghanistan is now the forgotten, abandoned country. I visited the country many times over the last decade. My brother was killed by Al Qaeda affiliate, and I was very curious to know what we were doing to try and support this country after 9/11. And I realized that in some of my comments when I returned, how such a raw subject this is. I don't think we can start by talking about this without paying tribute to the huge sacrifice of the British armed forces and others, many who were either killed there or returned with life-changing injuries. And I understand the absolutist position of nobody wanting to have truck now with the Taliban until it shows advances in how it treats women and girls. That is absolutely understandable. Those restrictions are indeed increasing. But the awkward reality is that we chose to cede power to the Taliban, to the very insurgency that we went in to defeat. And you're speaking about the numbers of troops, Americans and British and other NATO forces and so forth. We need to recognize it isn't just in Afghanistan, but it's in other parts of the world as well, where we've wandered into, whether it be Libya, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq and Syria. And without a strategic plan, without a clarity of what we actually went in to achieve. And what we saw in Afghanistan was the incredible umbrella of security created by our brave service personnel was squandered by an absence of any coordinated strategy to rebuild and by mission creep. We came in with boilerplate governance structures, completely ignoring the complex ethnic and tribal power bases that exist there. And indeed, not learning lessons from Afghanistan's own history, from our own efforts and so forth. So,
sure. Yes. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. And I absolutely appreciate the complexity of the situation and indeed your own personal link because of your own personal loss in Afghanistan. But we are where we are. And I wonder whether you believe that the same logic that the British government appears to be applying to its relationship with China, which essentially boils down to if we don't talk to them, we can't influence them in any way, should also be applied to the Taliban government of Afghanistan. What do you think?
So that is the very, very difficult question that we now face. And the trouble is that when we choose not to engage with the Taliban, we're actually punishing the 40 million people that we've actually abandoned because the Taliban are in charge. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves, how best can we influence what's going on? Is it by shouting from afar? We've actually cut our budget. What's clear from meeting the UN out there is that they've only got 1/5 of the money to provide the necessary support for the people of Afghanistan. And the awkward reality is there that the country, in my view, is likely to collapse either from an economic crisis or a humanitarian catastrophe, or indeed by another wave of terrorism, unless the West collectively starts to engage. And that's the tricky question. We may, as I say, have parked Afghanistan, distanced ourselves from it. Afghanistan hasn't forgotten us. We will see a scale of migration take place on such a massive level if the country collapses again.
Right.
And I add to this, the complex, if I may just make this final point, is that what I also understood there by going and quietly engaging myself, which is what I want the British Embassy to do, is that there is a difference of opinion, of views between the Taliban based in Kandahar, the old guard, if you like, that were in power back in the late 90s. That's where Habibullah Akhundzada is based, and indeed, the supreme leader. And then you got the practitioners who are based in Kabul that have to run the country. There's a difference of opinion between the young elements in the Taliban that actually do want to engage, and the political statements made by Habibullah, the supreme leader, in Kandahar. We need to better understand that.
Okay,
and then learn how we can then influence
we would better help the women and girls of Afghanistan who are now living, let's face it, in a dystopian nightmare, this idiotic situation where girls cannot go to school, can't go to a beauty salon, are banned from parks, can't leave the country to get an education. That's just been stopped this week. If this were anywhere else in the world, where in a fantasy situation we had an entirely female government running a country which had banned boys from education and stopped men going from parks, you can bet your life the whole planet would be talking about it.
So it's actually worse than you describe, because, again, speaking to the head of UNAMA, the head of the United Nations based in Kabul, she's pushing absolutely for a return of education for those girls over the age of 11 that I think you've implied. But in fact, everybody, half of all boys and girls under the age of 11 are getting no schooling whatsoever. The schools simply don't exist. And again, this is where the Taliban in Kabul recognize the need to engage with the international community and want that to happen. Now, I just spell out the dangers, if I may, for a second, of half the next generation not getting any education, not learning how to think. That will damage the economic prospects of the country. More importantly, it's actually then making them prime recruitment to be exploited and become the next generation of extremists.
Sure, but I think,
Al-Qaeda and so forth.
Mr. Ellwood, you'll be
that we need to recognise.
You'll be very well aware that when you went to Afghanistan recently and made the video, which many listeners will have seen and which I certainly saw, many people believe that you had been completely used by the Taliban. I mean, that video, you seem to be suggesting that it was a much safer place to be, and yet the whole video passed without a single shot of a woman or girl out in public.
Well, you skipped through, and I clarified my position. I chose the wrong words. You choose to go back to this space. What you've missed out is what was written on the front of my tweet, my video, is the fact that the situation with women and girls is deteriorating. And if we just want to shout from afar, we are not going to change anything. And that is the difficulty that we need to face. And on the visit, as I say, this has been also confirmed by other people, there is an eerie difference to the place now. The ability to travel you're able to do that simply because the Taliban are not putting their IEDs everywhere. Farmers can take things to market because they're not going to be blown up. It's the absence of the dangers that the Taliban were providing that has given a slight space for somewhere different to go. I spoke, if I may, to an Afghanistan association in London, where you had ethnic voices, different groupings, from tribal compositions from all over Afghanistan. Not a single person was talking about regime change. And if you're not talking about regime change, then you're left with only one direction of travel. If you want to influence what's going on, the very people that we want to help, and that's by somehow better understanding what's going on and engaging. And that's all my request was.
Thank you.
I'm pleased that Mark Malek Brown, other voices have now come out, Rory Stewart, David Richards, and others have also said, let's engage. That's the best way to influence what's going on, to help the very women and girls that we all want to see.
Mr. Ellwood,